Hello everyone. I wanted to do a follow-up video to my 144,000 who are they, where are they, and what do they do, to discuss the 24 elders in the book of Revelation. The reason is I had a good conversation with one of our channel members, Daniel, and the comments and my responses are pinned on the 144,000 video. Most of this video will be based on those comments, and I'd like to take a closer look at the text that Daniel and I reviewed together when we were discussing who the 24 elders might be, so that there's a separate video that addresses that topic. I thought about maybe adding it to the next CW JawTube comments number 3, but then I thought, well, we just did the 144,000 video, so it makes sense to follow it up with a 24 elders video, so that the two are fairly close to each other, and you can watch them both to get an idea of what these texts might mean. So let's go ahead and bring up the texts that specifically refer to the 24 elders, and also some texts that just refer to elders or an elder in Revelation, but which appear to be speaking also about one or all of the 24 elders. Here are the texts. We'll go ahead and read them. I've grouped them together so we don't have to scroll through the smaller type NWT that I sometimes use. And we'll just read right through them. I've made some comments at the end of the text, and I've arranged things a little bit differently and added a couple more things to the comments that you'll see between me and Daniel on the 144,000 video it's pinned where we discuss this subject. Let's go ahead and take a look. So the 24 elders in the book of Revelation. Let's start with Revelation 4:4. And here it says, "And around about the throne there are 24 thrones. And upon these thrones I saw seated 24 elders, dressed in white outer garments, and upon their heads golden crowns." And so I have a note here, they have crowns, but they do not offer incense or serve at the altar. They are also not called priests. And the reason I added this comment is because Daniel and I were discussing fundamentally whether or not these 24 elders are priests, the way that it seems that the 144,000 who are bought from the earth in Revelation 14, and also they appear to be described in the same way or similar way in Revelation 5, are described not only as kings but also as priests. You made them to be a kingdom and priests to our God, and they are to rule as kings. So while the 24 elders do sit on thrones, they have crowns. In this text, they're not specifically called priests, nor do they act in what you might call priestly function or service, like they do seemingly act a little bit later on, as we'll get to. So that's the first reference to the 24 elders, specifically as 24 elders in the book of Revelation. Let's go to the next text, Revelation 4:9. There it says, "And whenever the living creatures offer glory and honor and thanksgiving to the one seated on the throne, the one that lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before the one seated upon the throne and worship the one that lives forever and ever. And they cast their crowns before the throne, saying, 'You are worthy, Jehovah, even our God, to receive the glory and the honor and the power, because you created all things, and because of your will they existed and were created.'" I'm not going to get into the instance of the divine name in this text. I've talked about it numerous other times. I don't agree with every single time the NWT uses the divine name in the New Testament, but we're going to use the NWT anyway, and so we're not talking about the divine name, but I want to mention that in case you're kind of new to the channel and you're not familiar with my discussion about the divine name in the New Testament. So we're just going to move past that. If you want to use Lord there, that's fine. I have a note to this text. The 24 elders again have crowns. They respond to the 4 living creatures, offering praise to God and also worshiping God, but they are not called priests. Now, here it says they're just living creatures here, and I refer to them as the four living creatures because that's how they're elsewhere described. Kind of like we're going to get to texts that talk about the elders or the elder that seem to also be the elders, the 24 elders that we're talking about right now. As you're going to see, the 24 elders are frequently, almost in every text, spoken of in association with the four living creatures or the living creatures who offer this kind of praise to the one seated on the throne. All right, so again, they're not called priests specifically, though, the way those in Revelation 5, 8, 9, and 10 are described as priests and ruling as kings and are made a kingdom. So the question is, are these just other rulers in heaven? Are these other kings than those kings who are ruling with the Christ for 1,000 years, according to Revelation 20? Let's take a look at the next text, Revelation 5:8. And when he took the scroll, the four living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, each one having a harp and golden bowls that were full of incense, and the incense means the prayers of the holy ones. This falling down before the Lamb is perfectly appropriate because, again, as we know from Philippians 2, 9 through 11, the Son has been exalted, given the name above every name, so that all knees bow before him in heaven and on earth, to the glory of God the Father. And bowing down before someone is frequently done in the Hebrew Scriptures and even in the New Testament, Revelation 3:9, as a sign of reverence or honor, not of exclusive worship in the same sense that it is to be given to God the Father. Even when it is seemingly done in that respect, like in Philippians 2, 9 through 11, it's to the glory of God the Father, not to the Son, because the Son is the Father to us. John 14. It says in verse 9, and they sing a new song, saying, you are worthy to take the scroll and open its seals. This is the 24 elders and the four living creatures singing before the Lamb with harps and golden bowls full of incense, meaning the prayers of the holy ones, telling the Lamb he's worthy to take the scroll and open its seals because you were slaughtered, and with your blood you bought persons for God, just like in Revelation 14, the 144,000 are bought as first fruits from among mankind. You bought persons for God out of every tribe and tongue and people and nation. So if this is a reference to the 144,000, it would again complement my understanding as explained in the 144,000 video. That the 12 tribes listed in Revelation 7 that comprise the 144,000 that are described in Revelation 14 as bought from among mankind is a spiritual Israel. It's the Israel of God, the 12 tribes that are scattered about according to James 1:1, and the Israel that is saved according to Paul in Romans 11 by the full number of the nations being grafted in to the root, and so they become first fruits together with actual Israelites, who are those who are a remnant, who either put faith in the Christ or who could perhaps be a part of those who looked forward to the Christ like Abraham and so showed faith in him even before his coming. We'll wait and see, but it does describe people as sitting down in the kingdom of the heavens with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, whether that's in the new heavens or the new earth, they're both the hope of Christians. 2 Peter 3:13, Revelation 21. So we don't want to get too technical in the sense that we make it so difficult for people to have a hope that's based on those new heavens and new earth. Just read the text and apply them according to how you see them in those ways, and allow other people to do the same as we all exist together as Christians. It'll make our lives so much easier. But if this is a reference to the 144,000, as it seems to be, then it would again show that the 12 tribe listing is a spiritual listing, and it's not the actual 12 tribes of literal Israel, which also lends support to the spiritual understanding that I've discussed. but it states after referring to those persons who are bought by the Lamb, right? They're bought for God by the Lamb with his blood, because you were slaughtered, and with your blood you bought persons. So you have persons who are bought by the Lamb, and then after those, the Revelation 7, 144,000 are listed, right? It talks about a great crowd that then proceeds through the great tribulation that washed their robes in the blood of the Lamb. So there seems to be a difference in timing where it concerns the purchasing of people from the earth with the Lamb's blood, and then the washing using the blood of the Lamb of those who pass through the great tribulation, who are also out of every tribe, tongue, and nation. Which would include, if it's every tribe, right, it would also include people of the original 12 tribes or the remnant of those 12 tribes. And so again, you have the actual 12 tribes listed in a spiritual sense as I see it, like I explained in the 144,000 video. But you also then have the great crowd that's out of every tribe, tongue, and nation. And if it's every tribe, that would also include people out of the 12 tribes, just not the 144,000, for the specific purpose of ruling with the Lamb in this way that's described, as being made a kingdom and priests to our God, ruling as kings over the earth. And so I note here that the 24 elders are again pictured with the 4 living creatures, this time with both the elders and the 4 living creatures having harps and bowls of incense. So the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders are both together depicted in this way, right here, as having a harp and golden bowls full of incense, singing a new song about God, buying persons out of every tribe, tongue, people, and nation. And the ones bought are said to have been made a kingdom and priests to our God and to rule as kings over the earth. This seems to indicate a difference in identity between the 4 living creatures and 24 elders and those who are bought as kings and priests. The 24 elders, unlike those bought from the earth, are again not called priests. They're depicted with the 4 living creatures who sing a new song that the 144,000 master, right? They're the only ones who can master it, but who's teaching them that song? It doesn't say they're the only ones who ever knew the song in Revelation 14. They're just able to master it, right? And so it doesn't mean that others aren't singing a new song that they can then master. And so that's how I kind of see the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders as also singing that song or another new song, right? It doesn't have to be that there's just one new song. But if it's the same song, then they could have been the ones who teach the 144,000 that song, or who just knew it before the 144,000 mastered it. But the 24 elders are not called priests here. Now, they do carry bowls full of incense, which you might associate with a priestly function. So it's possible that they're also serving as priests of some kind. But they're differentiated from the kingdom and priests to our God that is comprised of those persons who are bought out of every tribe, tongue, people, and nation. Right? So the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders are separate, even if they're acting in a semi or actual priestly function, from the priesthood assigned to these people. But only these are actually called priests, even if there is some kind of priestly function ascribed to the 24 elders and 4 living creatures. All right, so that text right there, Revelation 5:8, is the one that really is the most close when it gets to indicating a priestly function for the 24 elders, but it's also given to the 4 living creatures, as distinct from those who are made a kingdom of priests and who rule over the earth. Revelation 11:16. And I know some people like to say rule upon the earth, and that's fine, but it can also mean over in the sense of control. I've talked about this in my writings. So it does not have to mean that they're on the actual earth, like epi. Epi can also mean in control of something. So they can be in control of it from heaven as part of New Jerusalem. on heavenly Mount Zion, right? Which is where the 144,000 are shown in Revelation 14. So if they're in, and their singing comes out of heaven. So they could be ruling as kings in control or over, meaning in control of the earth from heaven. Or as they descend as well as part of New Jerusalem. And then the kings of the earth bring their glory into New Jerusalem. So you have kings both on the earth and in heaven. But when it comes to those who are bought from among mankind as firstfruits, they're specifically described as on Mount Zion, at least for a time. It doesn't mean they can never come down to the earth, and it may even be that they do as part of New Jerusalem. And so, again, we have a new heavens and a new earth that together will comprise God's kingdom. Revelation 11:16, and the 24 elders who were seated before God upon their thrones fell upon their faces and worshiped God, saying, "We thank you, Jehovah God, the Almighty, the one who is and who was, because you have taken your great power and begun ruling as king. But the nations became wrathful, and your own wrath came in the appointed time for the dead to be judged, and to give their reward to your slaves the prophets, and to the holy ones, and to those fearing your name, the small and the great, and to bring to ruin those ruining the earth." So my note to this is the 24 elders are seated before God upon their thrones, and they again differentiate between themselves and God's slaves, the prophets, and the holy ones, and others who were or who are on the earth. Those fearing your name, the small and the great. So either they were on the earth or they're still on the earth at the time of these events, but they're not called priests. So they're differentiated from God's slaves, the prophets, and the holy ones, who, as we discussed in the 144,000 video, appear to be the Christians that are written about all throughout the New Testament. Now, the prophets here may involve others, but they're differentiated from both, the prophets and the holy ones. The holy ones typically applies to those who are described in the New Testament as having the hope of ruling with the Christ, of being with him in heaven, even if they eventually come to the earth as well as part of New Jerusalem. So once again, the 24 elders, they're seated before God on their thrones, so they're in a ruling capacity. They either have crowns or they're on thrones at different times in these texts. And that's how they're described at different times, is what I mean. But they're not described specifically as priests. Not in this text or in any of the others, not even here, where they seem to have a sort of priestly role or function, though distinct from the explicit priests mentioned here. Revelation 19. And the 24 elders and the 4 living creatures fell down and worshipped God seated upon the throne and said, "Amen. Praise Jah, you people." Also a voice issued forth from the throne and said, "Be praising our God, all you his slaves, who fear him, the small ones and the great." So my note is, the 24 elders are again pictured with the 4 living creatures, right here, worshiping God, and they again appear distinct from God's slaves, who are described here, and who are being spoken to, while the 24 elders and the 4 living creatures are worshiping the one seated on the throne, Jah. And being God's slaves is how the 144,000 are described in Revelation 7:3. We talked about this in my 144,000 video. Those who fear him, the small ones and the great. Once again, the 24 elders are not called priests. All right, so those are all of the texts that explicitly speak of 24 elders. So they're clearly described as rulers, right? They have crowns. They're on thrones. They're usually almost always associated with the 4 living creatures, right, whom nobody associates with the 144,000. And they appear distinct, along with the 4 living creatures, from those who are described as kings and priests, or who are bought from the earth as kings and priests, and as God's slaves, the holy ones and the prophets. Now let's take a look at a couple texts that just refer to elders or an elder, but who appear to be one or the 24 elders. Revelation 5:6. And I saw standing in the midst of the throne and of the four living creatures and in the midst of the elders, right? So once again, we get the four living creatures with the elders standing in the midst of the throne together. There's this association between those beings frequently. In the midst of the elders and a lamb as though it had been slaughtered. So the four living creatures and the elders, seemingly the 24 elders, are in the midst of the throne around a lamb as though it had been slaughtered, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which eyes mean the 7 spirits of God that have been sent forth into the whole earth. Same 7 spirits that are referenced in Revelation 1:4 as sending greetings along with Jesus and the one who is, who was, and who is to be. So if this association is correct, then we get the elders again depicted with the 4 living creatures and not described as priests. And there's no mention of anyone else in this context or specifically here. Now, this is right before what we read earlier in Revelation 5:8 through 10, where the 4 living creatures in verse 8, just 2 verses after that verse we just read from verse 6, 4 living creatures and 24 elders are depicted together, distinct from those who are bought from the earth, as a kingdom of priests to our God. So very close association within 2 verses of the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders, and then a distinction made between those who are bought from the earth as a kingdom of priests and kings who rule over the earth or in control of the earth. Now let's go to Revelation 5:11, which is right after not only 5:6 that we just read with the 24 elders or the elders with the 4 living creatures, but also after this text that we read. It makes that differentiation between them and those bought from the earth. So right after that it says, and I saw and I heard a voice of many angels around the throne and the living creatures and the elders. Right? So here it doesn't use 4 living creatures or 24 elders, but they've already been referenced several times. So the association appears to be just accepted that that's who they're talking about because they're not described as any other creatures, living creatures or elders. So it seems like these are the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders, but it groups them together with many angels around the throne, and it describes the number of them, right? So it first refers to the angels. Typically we think of angels as being myriads of myriads, but it groups together the angels and the living creatures and the elders. And after mentioning the elders, together with the living creatures and the angels, it says the number of them was myriads of myriads and thousands of thousands. So this seems to associate the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders with the angels as those who aren't bought from the earth in any special capacity, but who have specific roles in heaven as spirits. Now, let me just, let's read the note I have to this one because I make a few points and then we'll talk about them. It says, right after the people are bought from the earth and described as a kingdom of priests who are to rule as kings over the earth in Revelation 5:10, the elders are once again depicted in heaven with the 4 living creatures and the angels, and these 3 groups are all counted together as myriads of myriads and thousands of thousands, but not as priests. Not all spirits are angels. Angels is a term denoting the function of a messenger. Some spirits appear to be guardians, like you have the seraphs in Isaiah 6 around Jehovah's head, and they have different numbered. They have 6 wings, whereas the cherubs in Ezekiel 1 have 4 wings. So you have some, but they don't appear to be serving as messengers specifically in all of those texts, right? They're either surrounding Jehovah's or Jehovah's upper region or his lower region when he's on his chariot. So they're more like guardians or even watchers, right? The chariot's wheels are full of eyes. The angels are also known at times as watchers. Well, there's a difference between being a watcher and a messenger, right? If you're watching someone, you're observing and you're taking note of what's going on. If you're a messenger, you're delivering information from God to another being. But not all spirits are described as angels or as functioning as an angel, as a messenger. So that's why I say some appear to be guardians or praising spirits, right? What did we read about the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders or the elders? They're constantly praising the one seated on the throne, and even the Lamb for being worthy to take the scroll because it had been slaughtered and bought persons for God out of every tribe, tongue, people, and nation. And also ruling spirits, right? Like the 24 elders are like Jesus when he is on God's throne. He and those who rule with him, when they too sit with him on his Father's throne, Revelation 3:21, are not acting as messengers. They are kings who rule, like the 24 elders, but in a different sense, based on how they are described and when they rule as kings. Right? So the 144,000, or the kingdom of priests who rule as kings over or in control of the earth, Revelation 5, Revelation 14, their kingly rule begins after they were bought from the earth, whereas the 24 elders are already on thrones. They already have crowns. Right? And even other angels like Michael, the prince of Persia, the prince of Greece, they're not in angelic roles. They're ruling. Michael is kind of in a dual role, right? Because he's directly appointed by Yahuwah. But then he's given authority to act, right? Yahuwah says in Exodus that he has authority to pardon or not pardon. So he doesn't have to go back and forth to Yahuwah and get judgments and then deliver those judgments like angels would have to do in a strict messenger role. They can be given authority, just like Jesus is when he sits on his Father's throne, to act as their Father. And so when they're doing that, while they're administering his will, they're not directly conveying messages in ways, communicating things like laws, like we read about in the book of Exodus. They're actually rendering decisions with the authority they've been given. And so similarly, Jesus and those who rule with him, when they're described as kings, they're not called angels. So there's a difference between being a king and being an angel, even though Michael, for example, is also in control or ruling the other angels. He's the chief angel, the chief messenger. And that's how Jesus is described in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, as having the voice of the archangel. And so it's very strange when I find people objecting to him being the archangel, especially given the close association between what he does and what Michael does. And then he's described specifically as having the voice of an archangel. So he'd have to be an archangel. Either way, that doesn't mean he's always acting as an angel. But he certainly did in the past when he was guiding the people through the wilderness. And even before then, depending on where you see Jesus as one of those angels, as the angel of Yahuwah, delivering different messages. And also, when you think about Jesus as the wisdom of Proverbs 8, right? Is he a messenger there? No, right? There's no one to deliver a message to. It kind of gets back to the argument we talked about in relation to what certain Trinitarians say about whether or not the Father, God is always Father, and how that's not true because he becomes Father when he actually has a Son. Is he always the Creator? Well, no, he'd have to be the Creator when he actually creates someone, right? See, they can't grasp that because of their later biblical doctrine. It's the same with the word angel. Spirits are not always angels, at least not all of them. Right? Some may have been created at a point after other spirits in a role that they then just immediately began serving as messengers because there were other beings there to whom they could give messengers, and that was their role. But before any of the other spirits were made, when Yahuwah existed, according to Proverbs 8, with wisdom, whom he created, begat, same thing. Well, wisdom, who's wisdom going to deliver a message to? There's no one there yet until the other beings are made, the other sons of God. So that's another instance where, as a spirit, Jesus is not functioning as an angel. Angel is a functional term. And while many spirits are angels, they're not all described either as angels or as delivering messages. Sometimes they're given names like seraphs or cherubs, and while they too may have angelic roles or functions, that doesn't mean that's all they do. So in the same way, the 24 elders may have a priestly role at times, like offering the prayers of the holy ones as out of the bowls of incense. But that doesn't mean they're priests all the time. The way those in Revelation 5:10 are described as a kingdom of priests who rule as kings in control of the earth. And so I explain again the whole information I just provided on Jesus has wisdom in Proverbs 8, not being an angel at that point because there's no one to deliver a message to, right? He's just in direct communication with the Father, acting joyful before him all the time. The angelic role that he had, as is described later, came about when that role was necessary, or when he had been given an assignment either as a spirit or as a man to serve as an angel or as a messenger. Revelation 5:14, and the four living creatures went on saying, Amen, and the elders fell down and worshipped. Here again, the elders are depicted worshiping God in association with the four living creatures. But they're not described as having any kind of priestly role, although that's possible. But it doesn't mean they're actual priests in the same way that those who are bought from the earth as a kingdom for God are. Revelation 7:11, and all the angels were standing around the throne and the elders and the four living creatures, and they fell upon their faces before the throne and worshipped God, saying, Amen. The blessing and the glory and the wisdom and the thanksgiving and the honor and the power and the strength be to our God forever and ever. Amen. So once again, you see the angels standing around the throne, like we read earlier, and the elders and the four living creatures together. So they're all depicted in association with each other, but as well as distinct from each other. And we read earlier that they're described as myriads and thousands of thousands. Even if the number of elders is limited to 24, when grouped together with the angels and the four living creatures, that's how they were collectively described. But not as priests. And then in Revelation 7:13 it says, and in response, one of the elders, right, one of the elders here, and presumably one of the 24 elders who have been described throughout Revelation, one of the elders said to me, these who are dressed in white robes, who are they and where did they come from? So right away I said to him, my Lord, you are the one that knows. Right? So John doesn't seem to identify the elder, one of the 24 elders, as one of his fellow slaves. It seems to be someone more associated with, as we've seen, the angels and the four living creatures that are in a more authoritative capacity. Right? Even John in his inspiration doesn't really know who certain people are, like those who come out of the Great Tribulation. And that's why we need to be careful. Even though I'm presenting information here that I think makes sense here and with regard to the 144,000, we need to be careful that we don't enforce a view too strongly. We don't want to give people latitude to just come up with erroneous beliefs that aren't connected with the text information. But we also need to be careful, right? We don't want to fall into the trap that other people have by insisting on certain things. Let's make persuasive arguments. Let's leave it at that. But even John in his inspiration didn't know who those who were coming out of the Great Tribulation were. He had to be told that. And he was told that. So now he knows. But if even he in his inspired state in this book, in this revelation that he's being given, doesn't know certain things, we should be careful and limit our knowledge to what is explicitly stated. And at times that may not be obvious as whether or not it's literal or figurative. And so we need to allow for a certain latitude in interpretation as these things are fulfilled. My note to this is here, while it does not say 24 elders, that is who they appear to be. Once again depicted with the four living creatures. We'll see there. Oops. As well as the angels right after the 144,000 are sealed, right? So in verse 11, with the description of the angels around the throne and the elders and the four living creatures, this is right after the 144,000 are sealed and right before it's revealed who those who come out of the Great Tribulation are, the great crowd. So it doesn't appear that the angels, elders, or four living creatures are either one of those groups. And then one of the elders, again, is distinct from John, and he speaks to him in a way that suggests that he's not one of his fellow slaves. And it says, it appears John had no association between this elder and the 144,000 whom he just described. And the elder who speaks to him is not in any way associated with the 144,000 as if he's one of them. And so my conclusion, and again, most of this is included in the comments that I pinned to the 144,000 video in a conversation between me and Daniel, one of our channel subscribers, although I added a little bit for the purpose of this video. But I essentially concluded, based on the reading of the text that we just considered, that the 24 elders are heavenly kings usually depicted not with the Lamb, but with the 4 living creatures, distinct from those who are bought from the earth, those who are made a kingdom of priests and who rule as kings over the earth during a time when the 24 elders already rule as kings with crowns before the throne of God. The only description of the 24 elders serving as priests could be when they are holding the golden bowls full of incense, Revelation 5:8, which means the Holy One's prayers, again distinguishing them from the Holy Ones whose prayers they hold in the bowls. But several angels throughout Revelation are also seen as having bowls which they pour out. So does that mean that those angels are priests? Maybe that they are serving as priests in a specific capacity when they pour out those bowls. But again, it just goes to show you that you can have angels or the 24 elders acting in a priestly capacity without being considered specifically priests, the way that those who rule as kings and who are bought from the earth with the Lamb's blood are described as priests. And I go on, while the bowls that the angels hold are not filled with incense, they are still offering something in the bowls on behalf of God. Are these angels priests? Maybe, but they're not called priests, as are those who are bought from the earth in Revelation 5:8 through 10. The 24 elders and the angels, unlike those bought from the earth, are never described explicitly as priests. Could they be priests? Sure, or at least at times acting like priests. But they are clearly described as kings having crowns, and only in the sense of holding bowls of incense could they be considered priests, or acting priestly. So, I hope this review of information related to the 24 elders helps you better understand their identity, their possible identity, their role in heaven, which appears to me to be kings, ruling kings, different from the kings who are bought from the earth to rule as kings over or in control of the earth. They're already on thrones, they're already ruling as kings in some capacity in the heavens, there with Jah and with the other angels and with the 4 living creatures, all of whom have different roles, and while they may be similar in some respects, they don't appear to be identified as the 144,000.